The carbon credit market is today about $1 trillion a year. It's projected to grow to $3 trillion per year by 2030. And by and large, the biggest buyers are Europe, the United States, and China, all of which have various climate goals and are spending a lot of money to meet their international commitments. And then, of course, you have a couple of other countries as well in the mix. All over the world, most countries, most jurisdictions have some type of climate program that they're spending money on.
Hey guys, welcome to the fully diluted Messari podcast. I'm Dylan Bane, a research analyst on the enterprise team. We're joined here today by David Vorick, founder and CEO of Glow, and we're joined as well by Kinji Steimetz, our usual host on Fully Diluted. Glow is a DePIN project that incentivizes the deployment of solar farms. I'll let David explain in more detail. Protocol's one of the more noteworthy DePINs this year. It's already doing 7-figure in annual recurring revenue. It's deployed solar farms across the United States and recently in India, and it's gotten a lot of attention as well as a large fundraising round in October. So without further ado, let's get started. I'll just have David just introduce Glow, kind of what's the fundamental idea, how it started, and where things are right now.
Yep, so I'm David Vorick. It's great to be here. And Glow is a protocol that rewards solar farms with tokens when they produce carbon credits. Glow is designed to solve a incentive problem between the carbon credit industry and the solar industry. So the carbon credit industry is $1 trillion industry, and obviously it has the objective of reducing global carbon emissions. At the same time, solar farms are this new technology that produce electricity with much fewer emissions than traditional alternatives such as natural gas and coal. So you would think that these two industries make a lot of sense together, that the carbon industry would be spending a lot of money funding the solar industry. But what actually happened is somewhere around 2018, solar farms became profitable. And this created an incentive issue where it seemed like all of the subsidies that the carbon industry threw at the solar industry ended up collecting to these profitable solar farms that essentially ended up just increasing margins and lining the pocket of solar installers rather than resulting in more solar being produced. And so it took me a while, probably several months of being in the solar industry to really understand the depth of this problem and why it existed. But it comes down to incentive alignment. Essentially, the incentive programs that were being provided by or being created by the carbon industry were not effectively targeting the right solar farms. And so the money was just going in all the wrong places. And when you think about what technology is really good at aligning incentives, you land on crypto. So that's kind of where Glow started. Was like, oh, well, crypto is really good at incentives. Maybe there's something we can do to fix this clear incentive mismatch, this $1 trillion incentive mismatch between the climate industry and the solar industry. And essentially what Glow came up with is a competitive recursive subsidy. So kind of the first observation is that Bitcoin is really effective at producing lots of mining machines. You have it's a large block reward, but relative to the amount of infrastructure that was produced, it's pretty modest. And so you just had oceans and oceans of mining machines producing lots of heat, chasing ultimately not that much money, again, from a relative standpoint. And so Glow adapted the same model. It says, let's create an inflationary token. Token inflation will go to solar farms proportional to the amount of revenue that they produce. And then Glow's innovation and kind of what fixes the issue with the climate industry was the introduction of something that we call a recursive subsidy. So Glow basically says, if you are participating in the Glow program, Glow will give you enough money, enough subsidy to fund the construction and operation of your entire solar farm. But since Glow is paying for the entire solar farm, in return, Glow needs to own all of the revenue contributed by the solar farm. And so a way to think about Glow is as a program that essentially takes money, it goes out and constructs solar farms. Then as those solar farms produce revenue, it captures that revenue and uses that revenue to construct even more solar farms, which then produce their own revenue, and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of the base model for Glow. And today we actually see Glow more of as like a virtual factory. And even like Bitcoin is a virtual factory. So we think of Glow as this like incentive factory that produces real solar farms. And so I'll go ahead and stop there. I think that's a pretty good overview of the Glow mission and vision.
Let's talk a bit about the demand side. So, who is it who's buying these carbon credits? How large is the market, and how much do you see it growing?
The carbon credit market is today about $1 trillion a year. It's projected to grow to $3 trillion per year by 2030. And by and large, the biggest buyers are Europe, the United States, and China, all of which have various climate goals and are spending a lot of money to meet their international commitments. And then, of course, you have a couple of other countries as well in the mix. All over the world, most countries, most jurisdictions have some type of climate program that they're spending money on. So that's kind of the public or like the government side of things. That's probably about 98% of the market. And then still sizable, like 10 billion to $20 billion, depending on what metric you're looking at. You have the corporate side of carbon buying, which is essentially corporations that want to present themselves or present their brand as green to consumers or customers or employees or shareholders. So there are a whole bunch of different business reasons that corporations find it valuable to be green, and so they end up having robust climate programs that are also chasing ways to make the biggest difference possible.
On the government side, do you think there's potential for Glow to, be producing carbon credits for governments? Would governments be interested in that, and Glow provided incentives?
Yeah, so as Glow has grown, one of the things that we've realized is that carbon credits aren't actually the main thing that Glow is good at. So it's a carbon credit's a very like strong side effect, and it is very valuable. But really, what Glow does is it's not a carbon credit factory; it's a solar farm factory. Most governments have some program, if not climate related, then just like national security related or like they want more energy produced in their country because that brings more wealth to their citizens. And so lots of governments have interest in building out solar subsidy programs or programs to bring more solar power into the country. It's my belief that Glow is the most cost-effective and best solar subsidy program in the world. And so I think kind of the end game for Glow is partially carbon credit, like partially climate oriented, but it's partially just delivering lots of value through highly effective subsidies to governments and jurisdictions that want to see more solar power, whether or not that's climate related.
Gotcha. So long run, there could be a wide range of incentives and subsidies that I guess the Glow model could tap into to kind of grow up the demand side. Let's kind of talk about, I guess, the supply side now. So where are Glow farms deploying? What's progress so far there?
Yeah, so like Bitcoin, Glow has a super strong competitive pressure to it, and that means that every little like advantage that a solar farm can gain increases margins and makes a solar farm much more competitive relative to the rest of the field. So as a result, there's been this like heavy push to just constantly innovate. That started in the United States, kind of solar farms going up anywhere, Florida, Texas, but over time, that kind of condensed all into Utah. Utah was considerably more competitive than most of the other states. At some point, we expect to see Colorado showing up in the United States, but a plan was created. Someone was, looking at deploying solar in America. They were looking at the metrics, and they said, "Hey, wait a minute. India is a lot more competitive. There's more sun. The grid's relatively dirty. Labor is cheap, and we can build some really powerful solar farms in India for the Glow protocol." And so, I think it was like 8 weeks between that observation and the first solar farm going live in India. And so now there are 3 large solar farms that are going to be up in India in the next week. And so the vast majority, I think 95%, 98% of the electricity being produced by the Glow protocol today is in India, and then we're now going through the same process. Even better than India on the Glow protocol is Uganda and Mali. With luck, Glow will have some large solar farms going up in Africa very soon.
Gotcha. So it seems like you guys have been able to expand globally pretty fast for an infrastructure project. How hands-on have you had to be in terms of getting these initial farms, and how decentralized do you think in the long run will be deploying Glow solar farms?
Yeah, so from like an advice and help, and especially on an economic angle, like, how much money do these farms make, and what legal structure should we use, what contract should we sign? We've been pretty hands-on, just like helping people. But in terms of like making the connections, finding the installers, actually doing the work, we've pretty much been totally hands-off for that. And so mostly I wouldn't even call this a bridge. We're just like a source of information. A whole bunch of people are doing this crazy Glow thing. They want to understand it better. So we're talking to almost everyone. But in terms of like actually making deals happen and actually, pushing the projects on the ground forward, that's pretty much being done by people who are pursuing the block rewards and want to earn incentives of their own.
Yeah, I think a lot of listeners might think solar panels cost a lot in upfront costs, especially relative to most other DePIN devices, which might be a couple $100s. How are Glow users kind of financing these solar farms?
Typically, there's an investor involved. So these solar farms get cut into like, I want to say 5 or 6 major pieces where you have the installer who's typically getting a cash incentive. They generally don't know anything about the solar at all. You have a landowner who sometimes cares. In the case in India, the landowner doesn't usually care. Then you have like operators who are typically getting some combination of Glow tokens and cash as compensation. And so they're the ones doing the majority of the coordination and work. And then you have investors who are providing most of the funding. And of course, the investors are getting the majority of the token and cash rewards from the Glow protocol. Essentially, a lot of the optimization that Glow has done in the past 6 months or so has been to identify the different types of expenses and revenues associated with building a solar farm on Glow and dividing those pieces up so that each party ends up with a piece that that only they care about. So there's been a ton of financial innovation and financial optimization to make sure that every piece of a Glow solar farm is being priced correctly. And usually, because Glow solar farms, span a couple of industries, usually there's not one party that knows how to price all of it or cares about pricing all of it correctly. So it really has been important to cut these things apart.
I feel like this is a good time. Could you walk me through how value flows through the system? Because I know when Dylan was first talking about this, it took me a long time to wrap my head around it because there's a lot of moving parts here, right? You have like revenue coming from solar farms, you have carbon credits, you have Glow tokens. So I guess what does that life cycle look like? And yeah, if you could just help me clarify.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start by zooming all the way out. The core design of Glow is actually very simple, and then all of this like complexity and these like interesting mechanics are each just layers of optimization on top of the core mechanic. So the core mechanic is just a triangle. You have token inflation, Bitcoin style. Every single week, there's 175,000 tokens that get created. Those tokens get distributed to solar farms. So you have token creation. Those tokens go to solar farms proportional to the amount of revenue that they bring to the solar farm, to the protocol. So we talked earlier, to join the protocol, solar farms have to give all of their revenue to the protocol. Token value becomes electricity revenue. That electricity revenue is used to reward solar farms proportional to the number of carbon credits that they produce. So you kind of get this two-pronged incentive where solar farms are getting one piece of reward for their revenue and another piece of reward for their carbon credits. So now our triangle looks like, Glow token inflation. The Glow token inflation is used to produce electricity revenue. The electricity revenue is used to produce carbon credits. And then those carbon credits get sold to reinforce the value of the Glow token. And that completes our triangle. Token inflation becomes electricity revenue. Electricity revenue becomes carbon credit value, carbon credits. And then carbon credits get turned into token value. And so you get this nice virtuous cycle where as long as each lap around the triangle you're producing value rather than losing value, it'll just grow and get stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's the core design of Glow. And then we've kind of switched up some of these arrows a little bit. So for example, when you mint a production credit, what you're doing is you're actually locking liquidity permanently into a trading pair between the Glow token and a stablecoin. So essentially, what the solar farms are doing, they're playing this zero-sum game where they all put all of their electricity revenue into this like one central pool, and then that pool will redistribute the revenue, again, with like no leaks or losses. All of the money contributed by solar farms goes back to solar farms, proportional to the number of carbon credits they create. And so this essentially creates a game of averages where if relative to the amount of revenue you provide the protocol, you're creating a higher than average amount of carbon credits, you're actually going to get more revenue back than you contributed. On the other hand, if you're producing a below average number of carbon credits, you're going to get less revenue back than you contributed. And so this piece doesn't independently add value, right? It's just shuffling money around. But what it does do is it creates this like heavy competitive incentive pressure that forces solar farms to produce as many carbon credits as possible. And so the value comes from a second order effect where by doing this, now all of your solar farms are focused on producing as many carbon credits as possible. And that's what eventually drives the token value.
So you're basically taking the solar farm revenue in buying carbon credits isn't quite the right term, but it's using that revenue to acquire the carbon credits and then that incentivizes credit creation. Okay, perfect.
I also wanted to ask about a lot of people in DePIN are starting to talk about how do traditional finance institutions underwrite DePIN assets. Obviously, solar panels, solar farms require a lot of financing. How do you think about that underwriting process? And is there kind of a challenge in like having a DePIN element and a crypto element in doing so?
Yeah, so there has been a challenge there. If you modeled solar farms out on spreadsheets from like a private equity angle, they look fantastic, and the returns look great, and so you'd think all this money would come in. The problem is that it's a crypto project, which is something that private equity doesn't do a lot of, and so it's seen just by being in the crypto space and by being new and by only having $20 million of solar farms set up so far, all of these things make private equity very risk averse. So one of the challenges that we're having with Flow is like bridging this kind of like startup gap where at the moment Glow is very attractive to venture capital investors, but the solar deals tend to be more of a PE style return, and Glow isn't quite mature enough to get PE interested in playing around. There are many ways forward, and so it's not like Glow is stalled out. We're finding paths forward, and I think we'll be just fine. But we are in this kind of in between period where Glow is like too mature to be exciting to venture capital, and it's too immature to be exciting to PE, and so we just kind of have to cross that river, and then I think Glow will start to kick off pretty hard.
To what extent do you think that retail can really be involved with Glow, and how does that take place?
Yeah, so that's a challenge that we've been bashing our heads against for the entire life of the Glow protocol. So for example, Saya retail, anyone could put their hard drive on the protocol, anyone could use Saya to store their data. And you see things like Ethereum, you had a bunch of people using their computers to mine, or like Akash. And so most crypto projects, or like Helium, you could set up an access point for a couple $100. So most successful DePINs throughout the history of crypto have had this participation angle where everyday people could very easily get involved. But on Glow right now, kind of the minimum check size to make a competitive solar farm is a couple $1 million. Obviously, that's well outside of what retail is generally going to be able to participate in. And so it's been this open question of like, what can we extend to the everyday person that feels very exciting in getting involved in Glow? And we've had a number of ideas, but nothing that really felt like the entry point. So at the moment, retail is a little bit high and dry. They're not forgotten about. It's a priority. At the moment, Glow's economics are not very accessible to retail, and that's something that we hope to have a retail friendly product out of Glow soon.
Yeah, we're seeing some tokenized solar like DER platforms emerge where you can invest in shares of like a solar farm, for example. Do you see any potential for integrations there with Glow?
The main thing that I don't like about so of course, right, you can always like tokenize things and break things down and get crowdfunding elements in place. But the thing that I don't like about crowdfunding, especially with respect to crypto, is that the actual user isn't putting in any work themselves. And so if you're just punching in your credit card, you don't actually have like that much emotional investment into the project. Versus like with Helium, you're actually setting up a router, you're configuring it, you're finding roof space for it. Even if it's just 30 minutes, that creates a lot of like a deeper sense of ownership between the user and the project. And same thing, setting up a miner, setting up your hard drives, like maintaining a node. And so we would really like to find a product that's not just, send your money to this Kickstarter. We would like to find some way for retail to actually like get their hands dirty and actually, do something and learn something along the way. Yeah, there are a bunch of options, but we haven't found the one that really feels hands-on, and we'd really like to close in on that.
I also want to talk a bit about navigating regulations in all these different nations and, sub whatever state regulatory environments. How have you guys kind of navigated all of that? I can imagine it's like pretty challenging and just like being able to expand globally so fast. I think some of our listeners might be wondering.
Yeah, so the big secret is to have someone on the ground who is local, who's from the region. So for example, we have a couple people in India who grew up in India, who lived in Asia their whole lives. And so when it comes to navigating local regulation, knowing who the good installers are, knowing, what's safe and what's not safe, that's knowledge that's all entirely outsourced. Same thing when Glow goes to Africa, it's not going to be the US installers or Indian installers who are going to Africa. It's going to be finding a person in Africa who knows Africa very well, who gets excited about the Globe project and is willing to essentially step through all the hoops that are required to get a solar farm live. I think the major secret is just to don't depend on your own knowledge. Don't try and educate yourself, because these things are way more complicated, especially like culturally. India is such a different culture than the United States, and Africa is different from either of them. You don't want to try and immerse yourself into something that's going to take you years and years to understand. And instead, you want to find someone who understands you and understands your culture, but then also deeply understands the culture where you're building solar, and then essentially you give them the authority to make everything happen.
Also, I want to ask about economies of scale with solar farms. It seems like very large solar farms are kind of the end game of the Glow. We also have like a lot of talk about building out more distributed solar farms at a smaller scale and like potentially getting rid of some transmission losses from large scale energy transfer for more centralized plants. How do you think about all of that and how like solar energy should be deployed?
Yeah, so I think that Glow is going to do a good job of finding that middle ground. The incentives are basically just very powerfully aligned with like get as much power into people's hands on a practical basis as possible. Essentially, DePIN works the best when you remove all the constraints. So you say, we want this one thing to be optimized as much as possible, and you give builders the full freedom to do anything else that they want. And then they'll naturally figure out, if transmission losses are a big deal, they'll find a way to distribute the grid. If transmission losses aren't a big deal, they'll focus on these much larger, more centralized giant solar farms. And right now, things seem to be leaning in the direction of giant solar farms. But also, we know for a fact that the dynamics are going to change as we hit certain saturation points. So right now, Glow is pretty much entirely putting solar farms in areas where there's not enough existing solar to cover all daytime power needs, right? So Glow, none of the current Glow installations need to worry about batteries or nighttime or grid stability. They're all going in places where immediate energy is effective. At some point, you run out of those places, and if you want to make the whole world actually green, you're going to have to start moving solar power into the nighttime. We're going to have to bring in batteries or maybe wind installations, and so again, the market will do a good job of figuring that out itself. So the one thing I would definitely say is like the strategy that works right now on Glow and is most effective today will shift as Glow hits different saturation points. And I think there are maybe, at least two, if not, 4 or 5 different saturation points throughout Glow's life cycle that are going to force paradigm shifts in how solar gets constructed on Glow. So again, just because today centralized solar farms are the winning answer doesn't mean that the end game is a whole bunch of centralized solar farms.
looking at DePIN more broadly, it's obviously a space that's moving very quickly, evolving in real time. What have you been seeing that you've kind of might have want to apply to Glow, or like what are you learning just looking at other DePINs about the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think most DePIN projects are being successful on that retail angle. I think that there's a massive advantage to having a infrastructure that everyday people can participate in setting up, both mimetically, but then also because people are just excited to participate, you get a lot more involvement very quickly. You bootstrap a lot faster, and so Glow is kind of playing this like industrial game that most other DPINs aren't playing. I do actually see that as a disadvantage. I think that if Glow had some way to get retail involved on an everyday basis, it would be a massive win for Glow. And so we've been trying to find that angle. But at the same time, I think the industrial side is still very strong. I mean, these like large solar farms produce lots of revenue very quickly, as you know, as we've all seen. Glow is being plenty successful on the charts. But yeah, I do really appreciate the retail involvement that most DePIN projects bring, and I hope that at some point Glow can develop a solution to provide that as well.
There's also been like some level of debate about high P versus low P DPINs. You obviously founded Siacoin, which I guess you could say is a low P DPIN. How do you feel about the trade-offs and advantages of those types of networks?
I think if you can, low P is the way to go. You want as much as possible for all of your results to be cryptographically provable and independently verifiable. And so Glow ends up in this kind of high P territory where you have just things like a carbon credit is not a cryptographic asset, right? Electricity is not a cryptographic asset. And so when a solar farm says, hey, I produced 1 megawatt hour of power, there's no way for them to prove that. And so we end up having to use all of these alternative auditing and verification techniques. I think that that's a very risky and difficult thing to do. You need to be very careful when you're introducing these oracles that are establishing facts about the real world. And so a huge aspect of the Glow ecosystem is the auditing framework and the auditors who actually go and, you know, Glow sends a person on site to be physically present to every single solar farm that joins the Glow protocol and checks off all of these like physical boxes and takes photographs and creates basically as much evidence as possible for the community to be able to independently verify these solar farms. So we've found a solution that works for Glow. I don't think it's a scalable or generalizable solution. So I think any high P project that is in the DePIN space, the very first thing you should ask is, what's the audit process? How easy is it to cheat? What's the history of cheating? The project needs to have a really strong answer for what they're doing about essentially the Oracle problem and verifying that the things on chain match the physical reality. And I think it's super non-trivial. And any project that kind of shrugs off the problem is almost certainly being cheated. And it almost certainly has cheaters all over the place. And so, yeah, so that I think as much as possible you should avoid it. Where you do have high P, there should be a huge focus on what are you doing to stop cheaters. And so Glow has its answer. I think other high P, there are other high P DePIN projects in the space that also have good answers to the cheating problem. And so I'm not saying that it's like this unapproachable, unsolvable thing. All I'm saying is that a project needs to have a good answer to how do you stop cheating.
Do you think there's any potential for a more cryptographic way to verify energy?
I don't think so. On a physical level, energy is kind of like water, and it flows downhill. And then like how can you? There's no way to prove whether or not a water molecule has flowed down a hill before, especially if you're 10,000 miles away from that molecule of water. I think the best we can do is tap into public sources of data, such as satellite data, weather data from NASA, pictures from Google, and then use that as kind of like reinforcing evidence that what you think about the real world is actually true. But I think in terms of like getting cryptographic guarantees, that's going to be almost impossible.
Cool. So looking into 2025, what do you expect are the major milestones for Glow and other developments?
I think the big thing that we're looking for in 2025 is kind of a expansion ecosystem of people who are able to do financial modeling for Glow and create these like financial structures that say how much a solar farm is going to make, whether or not it should receive investment, what's the return profile. Right now, there are probably less than 10 people in the Glow ecosystem who are really adept at modeling these solar farms, and so everyone is kind of depending on them. I think that it's not that hard of a skill to learn. There's a lot of sort of specialized knowledge that's difficult to come across at the moment that you have to have, but a lot of effort is being put in by the existing people who can do this to create educational materials. And so I think over 2025, it's a goal of mine, and I think of several other people in the Glow ecosystem, to make these types of models and these types of decisions a lot more accessible to everyone else and kind of show the way. And then, so I would like to see a ton of people modeling these solar farms to make investment decisions, because I think a lot of people will find that frequently these investments make a ton of sense. And so the more people that realize that, the more money that'll come in, the more solar that'll get built.
Do you see any developments with like the Glow token, either changing the model or I guess being more publicly accessible?
Yeah, so as discussed earlier, there's a transition from this like carbon credit sale model to the production credit model. Glow is also rolling out regional support in Glow V2. So instead of right now, Glow is just this global stage where if you're not the most competitive country in the world, your country pretty much can't participate in the Glow protocol. There's a path to creating regional incentive programs. So solar farms that focus, say, just on India or just on Europe. There's another one that's been requested a lot in Europe. It's just not competitive at all. But if you have a regional Europe program, you can get Glow subsidizing solar in Europe. So we'll have those two things, and then there are a couple of financial tricks. One called Glow Swap, and one called Prism. I think will be pretty eye-opening. Both are a pretty fresh take on how one can structure agreements in the world of DeFi, and I think they'll get a lot of attention once people realize what you can do with them. So we're looking forward to releasing those as part of Glow V2 as well.
I guess just like on education, like have you found it a challenge to make like I guess enable people to understand Glow and kind of just like have the background to understand solar and energy and these more complex industries that have nothing to do with crypto? How have you kind of navigated all of that?
Yeah, initially it was very difficult and it took a lot of iteration. But over time, people are very passionate about Glow. And so if you pop into the Glow Discord, there's a channel called Glow. You can ask any question you want there as long as it's vaguely Glow adjacent. It could be about carbon credits, it can be about power, it can be, as long as it's somewhere near one of the industries that Glow touches. Nothing's too basic for that channel, and you'll find that lots of people who aren't on the core team, who aren't building solar farms themselves, will pop in and are able to answer and can help answer. And so just through it started with a lot of one-on-one conversations between me, experts in the solar world, experts in the financing world, just kind of coaching people. But at this point, that knowledge has disseminated pretty far. We don't have like a Glow wiki, or there aren't a ton of good like automated resources, or like I'll call them scalable resources yet to educate about Glow. That's base is still being built out. But in terms of like conversational knowledge, if you pop into the Discord, you'll find there's actually a healthy amount of conversational knowledge. And so it's a lot easier to ramp up on Glow today because of that than it was, say 6 months ago, where basically there's like one of 4 people that you needed to be talking to understand Glow. And now it's probably like 50 or 60 people who can really run you through the basics, and that means that you're not grabbing the CEO's time to ask questions. You can ask those same questions to just someone who's a casual community member.
Yeah, so in terms of learning more about Glow, socials, resources, etc., what's best for our viewers?
Yeah, so glow.org is kind of the main website for Glow. On that, you'll find a Discord. And then, of course, my Twitter is x.com/David Vorick, so you're welcome to follow me. Yeah, I think right now the main hub is Discord. And then over time, there'll be glow.org will be filled out with more educational materials.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on. All right, cool.